Hey everyone, welcome back to my shop. I'm really overdue on making a couple of picture frames, one for me, one for someone else. So let's get right into it. I've got a profile bit. I'm going to do like a thumbnail detail on it. I don't want anything too fancy. I have some maple here, which is kind of curly. I wouldn't say it's curly maple, but there is some curl in this maple, and that'll be nice. To do the groove for where the mat sits, I just measured a 1/2 inch on the outside of the blade to my fence, and a 1/2 inch up, and then I ran it through, and then I turned the piece 90 degrees to that, and then went through again. Fortunately, I forgot to turn on the camera, and I don't know if it's maybe not such a smart thing to do, because if you're going through and cutting loose that piece in there, it becomes a little bit of a projectile from the blade, and it just it didn't put a hole in the wall or anything, but it just went behind me and landed on the floor. But I think it probably could have been worse, but there's got to be better ways to do that, maybe a dado stack or something, but this was by far the fastest way to do it. Before I put the miters on, I'm going to put the detail onto the pieces of wood, and I'm going to use a router bit for that, and it's a thumbnail detail. So I'm going to use the router table and get that done first. It's going to take a pretty good chunk out of these, so I'm going to raise the bit slowly and not do it all at once. Even though there's a bearing on this bit, I use my fence as a bit of extra support. I got the profile done. It looks pretty good, but there's a problem. I cut my pieces 2 3/4. I always have a problem with proportion. These are going to go around a certificate, and I think it's just too big. I took a 1/4 inch off either side, and it still looked too big, so I went for an additional 1/4 inch off the opposite side that had the rebate. And that looks better. So I started out 2 3/4, and now I'm at 2 inches. Now that I'm happy with the width of the frame material, now I need to cut the 45s, and I'm not going to overthink it. I think I'm just going to use my chop saw. On this first frame, I'm going to use this frame clamp that I've got. I've had it for years. I've always found it to be very unwieldy, but it's been a few years since I've used it, so let's see if I've learned anything. I'm not happy how the corners are coming together. There's more gap than I want. It's pretty good, but I want to see if I can improve it. So I am making a shooting board. Just yeah, it escalated quickly. I'll let this dry for a while, and then I'll see if I can get those gaps better. I'm aligning the fence to the machinist square, not to the 45 that's on the fence. The shooting board's done. I threw some screws into it, put a little cleat on it, and I applied some of my shop-made wax. I'm going to put a little bit of pencil mark on all the corners so I can see which ones I've done and see if I'm actually taking anything off. The shooting board's working pretty well. The gaps are closing up nicely, but it's very time consuming, and not everyone's got like a low angle jack plane. So I want to make another jig real quick. Another jig. Just for the table saw. See if I can, I've got a little bit of room for this to shrink still, so I want to see if I can just make it perfect on the first time. I got my plywood, I've got my runners. I just put some washers underneath the runners so they stick a little proud of the tabletop. So I'm going to line up the edge of my plywood against the fence and the edge of the table saw. And I'll just use a little bit of glue, and then I'll come back with screws to secure it. I turned the board over, I put some screws into the runners, and now I'm just applying some more of my shop-made wax. Ooh, like butter. I could just use my combination square and just drop it into that groove and then glue something there, but I'm gonna try something else. I got these big squares for welding, so I'm gonna try using that. I wanted my fence to be a little bit lower on the jig, so I had to use a second piece of wood to align that to the square, remove the square, and then align my fence to that piece of wood that I initially aligned to the square. Clear as mud. I also used CA glue to hold it in place. Once that dried, I turned it over and screwed it in place. The clear winner here is the table saw jig. It right off the saw, it is nice and square, even in this wonky jig, and it's like ready to get glued up. So I'm going to glue it up. So here's a couple of improvements you can do to your jig that I didn't do to mine, and to be honest, I'm probably not going to make another one anytime soon. I should have put a bevel on the bottom of these blocks of wood for any sawdust to accumulate so it doesn't throw off my angle. And this, the apex or the top, should have been over to the side, and that way you can just do all one cuts on the one side, and then on this one other side here is very long. It gives you a lot of extra space to put a stop block so your measurements are more exact. On my frames, they're not exceptionally large, but I was running out of room here to put a stop block so that the measurements would be the same. I will be putting some splines in the corners, so I'm going to glue it up with a minimum amount of glue I can. I've got a couple small gaps where my reinforcement piece wasn't in all the way, so I'm going to fill those with this good filler in a bag, powder. It's walnut colored. It works pretty good, but it doesn't mix well. It's tricky to mix it. You start chasing your tail where you add too much water and then you put too much powder in, and so I found that using a spray bottle works pretty good, and I just let it sit for a while because it, like I say, it seems to be somewhat hydrophobic. I have it as a peanut butter consistency now, and I think that's where I want to be. The filler material is dry, so I'm going to take it outside and give it a quick sand. I'm only going to use a sanding pad, and I'm going to start at 120 just to blend in that thumbnail detail a little bit because I can still see the edge of the router bit, and just to take off the filler material, and then I'll just work my way up through the grits to about 220. I'm ready for a finish, and initially I was going to dye this blue, and I started playing with dyes on some scrap pieces, and just a procedure of putting it on, sanding it off, and restaining it, trying to get that curl to stand out a bit. And then I got the certificate back, and it's got a blue mat around it. I chose a blue mat, so it wasn't a surprise, but I think if I dye this blue and then with a blue mat, it's going to look bad. So I think I'm just going to leave it white and just put a clear coat, a lacquer on it. Bert, what's going on, buddy? Where's Ernie? Where's the other troublemaker? I really wanted to dye it to bring out the curl, but I think a blue frame and blue matting is going to be too much. So I'm going to leave this. I still think I'm going to dye the other one probably black, so I'll mess around with that a bit. I heard back from my friend about the size of the frame that he wanted and the color, so we are going to go with black. And this is the second frame here, and we are back to the frame clamp. And I know I said I was going to try these little pins, but on my frame, when I was just trying these out, and then I sloppily put in that grain filler, now I got these little dots in there. I hate these things. I don't. Why would you do that? Why would you knowingly put holes? Anyways, I don't like them. And then I also thought I'd try these little frame clamps. When I made mine, I only had 2, and I ordered a couple more. But they are very awkward when you're trying to do just one corner at a time. And I cheaped out, and I got the smaller ones. If you put them on the outside of the frame, they're not long enough that you can get a clamp on the inside of the frame without hitting the other one. So I cheaped out. They're too small. They'll be good for boxes or something. But if you go on the inside, they'll work. But I know I said all sorts of mean things about this frame clamp, but nice and square even in this wonky jig. But when the joints are good, it actually works pretty good. While the splines are drying in the frame, I'm going to do a couple samples for some stain. I've got the dye, the trans-tint dye, and some denatured alcohol. I did that before. I'm using the back of the little coupons. And then I picked up an ebony or true black semi-transparent wood finish. And then I made something for him before, and I think I used the espresso. So I'm going to do a couple samples, send him a photo, and see what he says. I've done about 4 coats on that little coupon there. There's just 1 coat on these 2. I let them dry for about 10 minutes and wiped them off. I think he's going to pick this one. We're going with the pure black. It does look good. The dye stain, I think it looks a little blue in the monitor, but it is like truer to being black. And I think you get a bit more curl there. I think it looks quite good. And I do have the backs of these sanded. I'm going to put more of this pure black on it because I will have to do a top coat. The frame has been sanded, so I'm going to go ahead and get the stain on there. So for finishes, I put lacquer on one, and I wanted wipe-on poly, but I don't have any. But I do have this tung oil here, which there's tung oil and polyurethane in there, so I tried that. The directions for the pure black say to wait 4 hours before putting a top coat in. I waited 5, and it wiped off quite a bit of the top coat, but it left kind of a nice effect. So I think I'm going to go with that. The lacquer is just too shiny. I really don't like it. And there's a spot in there. I think the goat put his nose on it. I had it outside. So I'm not using glue. I use it to focus the camera. Put some of this on there. If it lightens it a little bit, that's fine. It's been 8 hours now, so it should be a bit more color fast. Look how much of the black is still coming off. It's been 8 hours, but it is leaving it kind of a nice finish or a nice look. I think as far as my favorite goes, I do like the natural one. The lacquer did bring out the curl quite a bit. It looks quite nice. The darker colored one, the pure black, it was a bit of a, as Bob Ross would say, it was a happy accident to find that it lightened it up a little bit when I added the tung oil, which is not the pure tung oil, it's the other stuff. It must have been the solvent in there that was taking the stain off before it was completely dried, but even with following the directions, it's a good thing I tested it on a coupon. All right, let's get to the framing portion of this video. First, I want to drop my glass in, make sure it's nice and clean. Pull it out here and I'll clean it. To hold the mat nice and secure inside the frame, I'm using glazier's points. This is called an ATG, or adhesive transfer gun. It's just a very handy method of applying double-sided tape. So I'm just going to go around the inside of that pencil mark I just made, and then we'll put some craft paper on it. And I'm just going to stretch it over the back. This just keeps the bugs out, keeps it nice and dust free. And I'll go over it again and do that same line over again, and that will be my cut line. I prefer using wire on the back, so I will show you how I do that. I'm going to go about a third of the way down on the frame. Make sure your orientation is correct. This is the bottom. I'm going to go down a third of the distance. I'm going to use these D-rings, and they're just going to go in there like that. I stretch out the first few twists, and then just some real tight ones. And then if you really want to get fancy, just get some little rubber bumpers to put them on the bottom corners. There you go. One frame completed. I also don't want to give the wrong impression. This is a civilian service medal I got from the Navy for my time on board a ship called the RV Petrel, where we cruised around the South Pacific looking for World War II warships. And it was as good as it sounds. Thanks for watching the video. If you have any comments, questions, please list them down below. I'll leave a link to all the bits I used also in the video description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.